Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. This evening, I'm going to talk about collaboration, not just in terms of the traditional collaboration between architects, landscape architects, or architects, engineers, or professional kind of collaborations, but the collaborations that we think are important at the moment in the world we live in to make stuff happen. So why bother collaborate? It's one of these words that is thrown around. We should do more of that stuff. We should also just get on and do stuff. So why is it we need to do this? And what is it that can generate some of that excellence? So that's what I was going to kind of pick up on and then fold in some of your topics. To do that, I just introduce who we are. So I'm from Architecture and Design Scotland, and for those of you who don't know us, we're a non-departmental public body of Scottish Government. And our job is, as is on the screen, is basically to say design is a good thing. It can help lots of people solve complicated problems to make the world better. What we're not about is saying design is the only way to do things, or there's a particularly brilliant way of doing design. We're saying that the world is the way it is. It's one way to do it, and to make it work, we need to be very kind of clear about it. So our job is to kind of promote some of that. But I'd like to start off with this image here. And so this image here is Lerwick. And a number of years ago, I went up to Lerwick and we were looking at the Anderson High School. And the Anderson High School has been where it's been for a long time. And they've decided to move the Anderson High School over to a different part of the town. And that allows them to kind of achieve different kinds of education. It allows them to bring the community together. It allows them to do a lot of things, they say, that the 21st century wants them to do. But within it then, there's the question of what do you do with the old school? So as you're making a kind of new idea happen, what do you do with the old spaces? And that invites a very fundamental kind of question around collaboration. When we're making something new, maybe a consequence of the new thing is to also, and at the same time, think about what do we do with what we already have. And this town here has some very powerful things around collaboration that we kind of might take some depth from. The image is taken by Shetland Creatives, and they talk about the history of Lerwick in a very particular way. So there's an American man that came over in around 1900. His name, as only Americans can be, is William C. Wonders. Phenomenal. And he came, and this is the first scene more or less that Mr. Wonders kind of arriving into this place far away. And he investigated the town, and he went in and out the streets, and he went in and out the venues, and he discovered that one of the very particular characteristics of Lerwick are the lodberries. So it's almost like Venetian canals. So if you imagine the coastline kind of wraps around like this, there are cuts that come in, and the lodberry allows people to bring their boat in. So when the tide is in, literally they just offload their fish and bring it directly into the kitchen, and when the tide is out, then the boat goes on to a platform and they can fix it, so that the sea comes right literally to your house. And there's an architect who lives just down the main street, and he still lives in a lodberry, one of the houses just off it, and engages in exactly that kind of way. But to make something like that work, you need to understand the geography and geology of the place. You need to understand the engineering, not just of structure, but of the sea and in the environment. You need to understand the culture of the place and whether they get that kind of thing or not. So whether you like it or not, to make a lodberry work and to make that kind of system work, you're into collaboration to start off. And Mr. Wonders says that Lerwick is a creation of the sea. And that's its whole thing, is that everything about it is about a response to the environment. And when that goes wrong, you respond to it. When that goes right, you go beyond it. But also, Lerwick is the centre of a highly distributed city. So people take ferries from here. The council meets every week, and people take ferries to the next island, and then they drive along, and then they take it to the next island and the next island. So it's a huge distribution of people who communicate in a particular way, who share values in a particular way, and come together to collaborate in a particular way because they get that place and they get what has to be done. So one of the fundamental things around collaboration is not that it's easy, because it isn't. We might as well just be honest. It is not the easiest way to get stuff done. Often it results in some form of negotiation. Often it results in some form of argument. And almost always it invites some form of negotiation about values, about what you think is right and what somebody else thinks is right, and how we're going to get that through. So the collaboration, if you just want to do something, is probably not the simplest way of doing it. If collaboration is what you want, you need a central holding idea that says, actually, yeah, I get this, I get Lerwick, I get Shetland, and I get in that, the right thing to do is what we need to do, and we need a way to do it. Now we've got a mandate for collaboration. So let's be clear. Collaboration isn't the easiest way of doing stuff, but if we're going to do it, it cannot be just for simple efficiencies or savings. It must be because everybody involved in that sees there's something bigger to win. Otherwise, it just isn't going to work. I came to Edinburgh in 1996. I studied in Ireland in 1991 to 1994. I have these dates imprinted on my mind now because I'm getting dementia early, so I need to remember stuff. But in 1991, Ireland was in a recession, and when I did environmental resource management, there wasn't very much prospect of getting a job. And when I finished, I studied and I worked. And then afterwards, I was really attracted to come to Edinburgh to study landscape architecture because people had come to Edinburgh and they told this massively powerful story about how great a place it was and how the culture was amazing. And the first major lecture on landscape architecture that I ever went to was by a guy called Georges Descombes. And he had come over to tell us about the 700-year anniversary of the Swiss cantons. And in that period, they had created the Swiss path that connected all of the cantons all the way around. And what was interesting in that is Mr. Descombes started off and said, you need to kind of get the idea that, and you were at that lecture I think, you need to get the idea that each of the Swiss cantons see themselves as an individual country, with an individual set of rules, and an individual set of histories that they believe is absolutely right, which is totally different to the next one, and to the next one, and to the next one, which sets up a kind of fundamental design dilemma. How do you create a path that connects up between all these different bits and pieces, which responds to the particular conditions of each individual canton, but at the same time connects something which is bigger than itself? How do you do that? So the one thing we know is that there needs to be a path that connects it all up, and the other thing we know is that it also needs to be different each time. So we need two conversations. One is around the overall big thing, and the second is around the differences. And in that presentation, he didn't have the benefit of PowerPoint. It was a carousel type of thing, and there was two carousels moving, and he had two things and legs and arms, and so it was all going mighty. And there was images flipping up, and this, that, and the other. And this image came up, and at a certain point, I thought it was a special effect I'd never seen. It starts to kind of go red. You know, it was kind of amazing, and then it starts to kind of just kind of get smaller. It disappeared. I thought, God, this guy's awesome. Until I looked around and I saw the projector on fire. All the slides had kind of gone out on the guy. So here's the guy, right? And he has all these slides, like hundreds of these things, all on fire, which is probably not the kind of impact that he was looking for, but an impact he got. So how do you tell the story of this complicated geography that he laid out with this kind of complicated path with no images? So the only one image that I remember from it was this one. And this is where the path crosses a particular stream. And he talks very clearly about his childhood when he went down to streams like this in Switzerland. And something about the geography and the geology of it, where when you were in the stream, at the same time you had this intense experience of water, like it's just wrapping around you, and you're far away from things. And because you had the two intense experiences, you knew the water was going somewhere, but you were kind of on your own. And one of the things he wanted to do was then to kind of give everybody that crossed the path the same experience. So the path crosses through this tube, and the water passes through the tube. So as you're moving through it, you get this really, really powerful experience. And from that point on, there was no images. But he talked about from this point you go to the next canton, and in the next canton, the topography stretches up. So it's real intense topography, and the sheep kind of move along, and they've created these different contours. And in that one, what they did was they stretched out the sheep path. So the path kind of comes from this, it moves up the contours, and then it just stretches out, so you almost never see it. But when you're on it, you're kind of going, it's a bit, must be big sheep down here, kind of thing. And then as you go on to the next thing, there's a forest, and you move through the forest, and they planted 1 million poppies. So the direct line of the path is only present at certain points in the year. So they responded directly to each canton around an idea that everyone got to celebrate this kind of 700 thing. And what really kind of struck me around that is that the collaboration wasn't just between the designer and the maker. The collaboration was between the citizens, the designer, and the maker. And I think that's one of the kind of interesting and important things around the collaboration, as much as we want to do interdisciplinary working and get on and have a good time and whatnot, sometimes that's just us doing our own thing. But one of the things we need to involve in the collaboration, if it is to be a real incredible way of shifting the way we do stuff, is to involve that citizen thing. And so we need to engage in some difficult debates about how do we involve citizens? How do we listen? How do we translate, and how do we do synthesis? Which brings not just the process of collaboration, but a more fundamental discussion around leadership. And one of the, I was last week at the European Landscape Charter discussions. And I go to, as part of the job, it's a great privilege, you go to see different things, and every single person that you meet from every single interest group wants everybody else to recognize the interest. Everybody needs to respect architecture. It's the year of innovation, architecture and design. We need it to be at the peak of everything. Everybody needs to respect and admire landscape. We need to be at the peak of everything. So what we've got is competition of different interests, all wanting to do different things. But maybe one of the things that landscape is phenomenal on is resolving very, very complicated, difficult questions like this. Maybe the leadership is about leading in between. Maybe the leadership is about using landscape as a way of connecting people and say, actually, there's a way we can do this. If you get Lerwick, and you get the cantons, and you get the landscape, you've got people's heads. And just like Georges Decombe described the whole thing without images, it's almost as if the guy got in your head and painted a picture and invited you to kind of engage with that picture and then to talk about someone else and to talk about someone else. None of us saw the image. All of us engaged with the story, which was a landscape story around the potential, the huge potential of shifting places. And all of us left that lecture thinking, wouldn't it be great if we did more of that kind of stuff? Wouldn't it be great? And essentially, the guy's lecture was a lecture and a lesson in collaboration. Is it important? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Because one of the other things I've learned in the job, I worked in private practice, and when I worked in private practice, it used to feel real easy. You would write a report, you give it to the government, and then you give out to them because they didn't implement what the report said. And then on the inside, I've kind of realised that actually it's really difficult, because the government is paid to be accountable. And then we've created a bureaucracy because we need this to be kind of accountable. And inside both ideas, things change constantly. And one of the phenomena of the 21st century is that change has accelerated and it's more difficult to predict. We make crazy votes about stuff we don't understand, maybe. We make decisions about things that are really immediate. We do things at such a pace and the consequence of those moves on, so the territory shifts. It's not an easy world, it shifts. And in this shift, there's a guy called Colonel Gensler. He's part of the American camp that trains things. And he said, if we were to have one single skill to beat the enemy, it would be agility. It would be to read the patterns and then to be able to move quickly. And then in that move, to get everyone else to kind of come with us. Same as this guy, Mr. Alvin Toffler. He's a futurist, and he was the editor of Forbes magazine. So when all of the multinationals make loads of money and the richest person makes the richest amount and does the richest, it appears in Forbes magazine. He explains how it all happened. And he started to look to the future and say, so what is the future? What is different? And he said, what the future is about understanding different patterns and then working with people to deal with it. And part of that is about these three words at the end. It's about how we learn. So we need to get certain stuff. And Mr. Decombe was an architect, believe it or not. And that was one of the things which was interesting about that lecture. I entered that thinking landscape architects need to be all landscapey, all from that kind of tree kind of thing. And here was an architect, what the hell would he know about it? And he understood sensitivity, he understood people, so he learned certain things. But to make all this stuff happen, like the geometry of Lerwick, like the tubes the guy talked about, like the sheep thing, like the 1 million things, somebody in that team had to unlearn some of the things, unlearn prejudice, unlearn the right way of doing it, the way we always did it, I-beam, and relearn the way of collaboration. So the thing that this guy is saying is that the world's changing quickly, and we don't have a roadmap for it. All we have is the ability to learn, unpick a situation, take out the stuff that's rubbish, and then relearn stuff quickly. And if you're doing that, you need a framework. What's a bloody good framework to do it? Landscape is a good framework to do it because it is a constant thing that engages people to say, as difficult as life is, as full of hassle as life is, you walk out and you see what you see and you get it. And that allows you to learn, unlearn, relearn. So I suppose one of my things here is that sometimes I'm a landscape architect, I'm guilty of this. I often go around saying, people should love us more. People should love landscape architecture more. We're always at the back end of stuff. Why are the architects so nasty? Why are the engineers so weird? Why is life so difficult? So we can, by accident, start to promote a narrative of if only. What about if we stole a march on this whole complicated world and said, what about? What about we use this and take leadership and give loads of people a framework to learn, unlearn, and relearn? And what about we did that by leading in between, not demanding that people like us more and da-da, more policy and da-da. Just do. Just do. And I'm putting this challenge as much to me as to you. And I'm putting this challenge as much to the architects as the landscape architects and everyone. Because if it is what we're after, if it is what we're after, this excellence, then we need to be clear what that excellence is. We need to be honest about how we're going to do it. And if we're going to do this excellent collaboration kind of thing, maybe there's different ways that we need to break it down, right? So the collaboration stuff is one of those words like sustainability. That is as woolly as my mother's socks. You know, it's like everything's all sustainable. You know what I mean? She's not a good knitter, by the way. Right? So we need to be kind of clear. So here is my unevidenced, from my point of view, with no research, framework for collaboration. Number one is peer-to-peer. So 2 years ago, I was invited by the Royal Institute of Architects in Ireland to come over, and they were talking about creating their corporate plan. You know, we're an institute, and we want to kind of think about where we go and how we engage the architects and deal with clients and blah, blah, blah. And the problem is the project managers are doing more of our work. And the architects, you know, are, and all the, so there's a kind of like, we're losing out. How do we steal ground and gain territory? And one of the things that people said is, do you know, when we look at ourselves, so the collaboration, when we look at ourselves, just us, we don't actually support each other. So we have small businesses trying to do things, bid for certain stuff, and another business has the knowledge about how to do that, but we don't share that. We have medium businesses trying to scale, and another medium business has already scaled with the knowledge, and we don't share that. We have multinational people who have been bought out and taken over and whatnot from being small and moved into the different realm with the knowledge, and we don't share. So maybe one of the things about us, whoever we are, if we want the collaboration to work, is to look at ourselves and how can we get more peer-to-peer, business-to-business, honest sharing of knowledge. Not competitive stuff, not to profit if you can share that if you want. But if we want the profession to grow and we want the agenda to grow, then we need to differentiate between private kind of knowledge profit and stuff that gets us all to move on. Because if we don't do it, nobody else is going to invent it for us. So number one is peer-to-peer. What does peer-to-peer look like? It probably looks like a pint, a chat, and then around that, then some format, framework to share the knowledge and somebody to capture the knowledge. And fundamentally, somebody needs to know where the bloody knowledge is. It's not like my son's room where I know everything's in there, but man, if you open the door. So we need to, you know, so one is peer-to-peer. So before we get lost in the kind of romance of collaboration, let's get down to basics. Peer-to-peer. We are a small country. This is a small profession. Architecture in Scotland is still a small profession. It cannot survive, it cannot scale, unless we get a better way of peer-to-peer chat and peer-to-peer sharing. And second thing, in this room now, we have different generations of people who have gone through different levels of hassle, different levels of success, who have won fights, lost fights, who have done things, who are about to do things, who are full of hope, who are full of like, will he ever shut up? So in this room here, we have different generations of knowledge and experience. One of the problems of different generations of knowledge and experience is that we don't actually organize, curate, design, insist that there are moments when the generations come together, when there can be respect for the older and mentoring of the younger, when we can get that cross-generational sharing. This here image obviously is an old hand and a young hand. And it is an image taken from a film that is to be announced next year called Present Perfect. And it's taken from a care home in Mount St. Vincent's in Seattle. And Mount St. Vincent's in Seattle is run by the nuns, and my mom loves this. As a good Catholic, she kind of go, there you go, the nuns were always good, weren't they? I never had an experience. But they're nuns, right, and they're running it, and they run a care home for around 300 older people. And so people go there, and they're cared for, and then at some point they move on or they die. And that's what they do, and while they're there, people are given the respect that they're entitled to. Here's the unique thing about Mount St. Vincent's in Seattle, is that they've co-located an early years centre in exactly the same building without building new space at all. So whose idea was it to co-locate like the really young and the really old? Well, why would you do that? Why would you do that? Who the hell wants that? It turns out there's a waiting list of 3 years to get into this place on both sides of the generational divide. On both sides of the generational divide, 3 years. Every single day, the young people come and they are greeted by the older people. Every single day, activities are organised where they talk to each other, and sometimes the older people can't hear, and sometimes the younger people have to repeat. And you know what? It's been proven, because the kids have moved through, that helps them to talk, and it also helps people to reach. And then they do art together, they get out and garden together, they make sandwiches for the homeless in the area together, develop citizenship together, and all those kids go to school ready for learning, ready for life, without any major state intervention, and the attainment is enormous. And what is interesting around this is at the heart of it, this can only happen if there is some framework that people get, if there's some end state people believe in, if there's some kind of values that people are around, and if that older person, that younger person, agree to collaborate in the activity. No agreement, no collaboration, no point. Well, what's interesting is the Present Perfect title is called Present Perfect because the only space that we can share between generations is now. The other one, which is interesting, so the first one is peer-to-peer, and the second one is intergenerational, which is in this room, which is also in the RAI, which is also in the ICE, which we do not use. We do not use our inherited knowledge and our embedded learning sufficiently. Not at all, no way, not at all. We keep repeating stuff and inventing stuff, and the problem with that is we're wasting money and time and hassle and whatnot. So we had more peer-to-peer, and we had more support, then we can do more. Another thing, though, is to kind of be honest about who we are. We're just a bunch of folk trying to do a bunch of stuff, but we're not all running landscape architecture practices. Some of us are in engineering companies. I'm in a Quango, more or less. Different people are in economic development. You know, so the person called a landscape architect is actually sometimes hidden in different worlds. And this is a picture of Chinatown. So Professor Dorian Massey, who is part of the Open University, mapped an idea of the city in terms of flow and movement and whatnot. And in this way of looking at the city, they reckon that Chinatown is the world's third largest city. Not just in an individual one, but when Chinatown establishes in a place, it establishes almost in exactly the same way. The way you feel, the way it looks, what they sell, everything is the same way. And most of the money from this is held, some of it gambled, and a lot of it is repatriated to families back in China. This is a distributed system. This is like immigrants, you know? This is like your diaspora. This is like a massively, massively powerful network. So maybe one of the things around the collaboration thing is we have embedded people in different organizations shifting things. A number of years ago, Peter McCaughey, who's an artist, was embedded in the Glasgow Housing Association. What does he know about housing? What does he know about people? A lot. What did they get from it? Well, they started to realize that people look at life different, so they had an embedded thing. What did the artistic community get from that? A lot. Because they kept asking Peter, how did these people think? What do they do? One of the things that maybe we can use more of is our distributed system of landscape architects. We're not all detailing paving. We're not all planting plants. But we all have different levels of influence, and we all have different levels of supporting each other and shifting agendas. So if we had peer-to-peer collaboration, do more together. If we had intergenerational collaboration, value the knowledge we have, and if we actually tapped in to the power of the network we have, then I think this could be a really phenomenal power to shape things, because the landscape is something people get, and the outcomes are something people want to do. This here is on Tillon, done by Lisa McKenzie, up in University of Highlands and Islands. And I was in University of Highlands and Islands a couple of weeks ago. And you want to go up, it's mental. You know, you go up to Inverness, like it's one of the most mental cities in the world. You get a train all the way up from London, and then all of a sudden you're in the Scottish Highlands. And in the heart of that, you've got this institution that is working in a region bigger than Belgium. And they've managed to work out a digital connectivity network that connects the whole thing. So there's museums, libraries, little bits and pieces in a cloud, you know, system going across. You can access MBA, Harvard quality information in a wee library in Shetland and get your degree. So the University of Highlands and Islands has managed to work out that different people in different landscapes with different ways can actually have a phenomenal life and compete and do stuff. And inside that, they needed to represent the ambition and represent the future and represent what's possible through a collaboration on the master plan with 7N and Lisa McKenzie. And Lisa built this with 7N, not 7N designing it and Lisa tweaking the bits. Lisa designed it with 7N. So there's something around, that's quite a big shift from when I went into my Georges Descombes kind of thing, and people said, you know, the future is about landscape architecture leading stuff. And well, good luck with that. Into a number of years later, where a landscape architect, as part of a respected member of the team, is actually leading and working, not in charge of, you know, kind of moving across. So this is the interdisciplinary stuff. It is important, it is really important, but I put it fourth for a reason, because I think it is the fourth most important thing. I think the first most important thing is the peer-to-peer. I think the second most important thing is to use the knowledge we have. I think the third most important thing is to tap into the distributed network. And then I think the fourth most important thing is, yeah, let's hit the architects for one. Let's do the engineers for one. Let's get on with one. But actually, do you know what? If that doesn't work, we've got our peer-to-peer. We've got our intergenerational, so good luck with yourself, right? So there's that. What possible difference could any of this stuff make? What possible difference could it make? When I grew up in Ireland, I was born in 1973. It's not a particularly memorable year, but it's a combination of numbers that I quite like, you know. So, and around that time, Northern Ireland was at the peak of a particular condition of hatred between communities. People who like can sit across from each other. It was at the peak of an absolutely mental division of people, communities, families, just mental. One of the most iconic parts of that mental period is this gable end, this back end of absolutely nowhere. And as you enter into this, the community are telling you you're entering free Derry as long as you think our way. So this here is also part of a marking of territory. This is not collaborative at all. This is divisive stuff. This is saying in this territory, it's us, right? And if you're us, that's fine. And if you're no, then take your chances. In Derry, Ebrington Barracks, which is this one here, is quite an interesting juxtaposition. And it's an interesting juxtaposition because that street elevation there is based on the Georgian way of laying out houses. So in Dublin, in Merrion Square, in this area here, the whole way the streets are laid out, the windows are laid out, the detailing, all that, you know, all the kind of Georgian architecture was taken in Ireland and it was made more rural. And so we dealt with windows in a particular way, we dealt with plaster in a particular way, we dealt with doors in a particular way, colour in a particular way, blah, 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 blah. But it was all fundamentally based on the Georgian thing. So you've got this kind of Georgian composition over on one side. You know, it's very traditional, it's very ordinary. Then you've got this massive barracks on the other side. It's not really Georgian, I don't think. You know? And it tells that particular story. So this juxtaposition is saying something's wrong in this picture. This is not a happy, peaceful place at all. 1981, I travelled with my family, who I live from, the southeast of Ireland, and then we were travelling up to the middle of Ireland to a place called Portlaoise. So all of the Republican activists, all of the terrorists who were arrested, were all put into Portlaoise jail. It must have been a great place for, kind of good crack on a Friday. And that was the kind of centre, of a real amount of tension. So we were driving up, and that was in 1981, and Bobby Sands had just died. And I remember driving through fields, or driving past fields, and driving past trees and whatnot, and black flags up commemorating the death of this Republican. And I remember when I was 8 thinking, this is quite intimidating. And I'm not sure that I, at 8, can hope for a future beyond what's going on. The landscape is familiar, like them there houses, but this flag is a bit like that barracks, and I'm not sure at 8 I can imagine a future beyond this. How do you get beyond this? And one of the answers is, okay, the Good Friday Agreement kind of came along, and various things come along, but one of the answers is in that collaboration thing, that kind of woolly mother sock kind of thing. And the collaboration, I suppose, in the next couple of images, is around a community collaborating with itself, reaching out and saying, we kind of have certain things in common. One of the things we've got in common is the geography of where we're from. One of the things we have in common is the aspiration for a future that we can hope for and imagine for and build. And in that, we need to build, like Mr. Decombe, not pictures that are predefined, but we need ways of getting in people's minds and helping them to paint pictures and then pursue those pictures with vigor. And luckily enough, the barracks was emptied out, and this is Everyton Barracks, and this is a scheme done by Open. So this is the barracks. It's now a public space. I was in a car when I was 8, travelling to Portlaoise with black flags on trees. I never, ever imagined that this place would be a public space. And I don't think that this is just about the landscape architecture detailing of the thing. I think this collaboration is about a community talking to itself and finding a bloody good designer who listens, and then work with them to imagine a place which gives 8-year-olds a framework to imagine their futures. And in this barracks, lots of things happened. And one of the things that really happened that is the most memorable part of it is Bloody Sunday started here. This is where the British Army left from. So this is quite a big and emotional place. And at the opening of this here public space, the BBC were there, and they had a festival, and they kind of cascaded things around it. And they wanted to kind of celebrate the fact that this difficult space had been reclaimed by a community, not just in terms of its physicality, but its ownership. A bit like the Lodberries and Shetland, it's ours now, it's open now, it's free now, it's proper free. And they had a kind of an event like this, and people drank and talked and did stuff and various different things. And I'm not going to talk to the last image, but when I was in 8, in that car, I never thought that the next image would ever happen, not just in Northern Ireland, but in this specific place. And I guess, going back to your kind of invitation to speak here around collaboration is excellence, what might be the outcome? What might be the outcome of collaboration if we did more of the peer-to-peer, if we did more of the intergenerational, if we did more of the tapping into the network, and then if we did good stuff? That's the barracks. And that's maybe the outcome that we're after, enabled by good design, enabled by people who are passionate, enabled by the idea of possibilities.